Hello, I'm Richard Vobes, the Bald Explorer, out on another exploration, and today I am on a farm, ladies and gentlemen, with the very lovely Lee Dallyn. Hello, Lee.
Hello, Richard.
You very kindly invited me, having seen my walk around another farm looking at a barley crop, and there was me saying it was monoculture and landscape and all of that, and you said, well, I want to come to the defence of farmers. And I'm very pleased to hear the defence of farmers, because I was looking at the sort of history from the 60s up into the 90s, and things have changed now, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. I mean, monoculture is one word for it. We do grow big blocks of one species, so big block of wheat, big block of barley behind us here. But it's by no means a monoculture. We are bound by rules that enable us, we have to grow at least 3 different crops on our farm. So we can't just have one crop over a huge acreage. One crop can't be any more than 75% of your farmed area. That's a rule that we have to live by. On this farm this year we're growing 4 different crops. Some years we'll have 5, some years we'll only have 3. It changes with our rotation. So we're by no means monoculture. Yes, the fields are bigger than they were in the 60s and the 70s, but as with everything, economies of scale, machinery's got bigger, we've got more efficient, so we need a bigger area to be able to farm.
But just looking at the farm, I mean, you can still see the hedgerows and I suppose from the aesthetics, which isn't really something your accountant necessarily is worried about, but the general public like to, I think, see the hedgerows and think that there's wildlife and that it hasn't just obliterated everything else. So although you say they're quite big fields, they're not massive, like mile long, or as you see in Europe.
No, they're not. We're not prairie farmers by any means here. We're only a small family farm. Our biggest field is 15 hectares, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is about 45 acres. So that's our biggest field on the farm. We have made fields bigger in the past. That 45 acre field used to consist of 15 fields at one stage in its life. So it's been made bigger, and hedgerows have been pulled out, unfortunately, which was my grandfather and my father's generation. My generation, we've planted new hedgerows. We've planted about 1,000 metres worth of hedgerows on this farm in the last 10 years. All native mixed hedgerows, so they've got food, they've got different habitats. We've also maintained older hedgerows, cut them back, let them come back into nice new lush hedgerows rather than old woody ones. We have trees that have come back, oak trees we've allowed to grow, ash trees which are unfortunately suffering from dieback, so they've got to go. But we've had storm damage, so we've planted more trees, and we're looking at planting other trees and other species to help out the ecosystem in the future. So we're forever looking to help nature, not work against it.
Lee, you brought me into this very lovely barley field.
Yeah, spring barley this is.
Spring barley.
Yeah, this was drilled about April, beginning of April, I can't remember the exact date. This went into a field that was fallow over the winter. We put some farmyard manure on it, good old farmyard manure, and it also had a cover crop, a nitrogen fixing cover crop growing in it, that we incorporated before we drilled it. That helped give a bit more organic matter to the soil, but also gives it a bit of a kick up the arse and gets it going. It's a good starter for the barley. As we can see, it's out in here, it's golden, it's actually going, what we call, it's going off. It's getting ready to harvest. This field will be ready to harvest in about 3-4 weeks time, which will be a little bit earlier this year, but we've had the weather, so it'll be ready to go and ready to turn into beer and whiskey.
Fantastic.
Which would be nice.
Which would be lovely. Now you've done something interesting with this crop. You've not sprayed it with pesticides and all those.
No, as it happens this year, normally we would weed spray, weed fungicide. We wouldn't need any insecticides, but we definitely need fungicides and herbicides on this crop. With the growing year we've had, it going from a quagmire to a dust bowl in a very short space of time, we take you call it a holistic approach. We look at the whole farm and the whole crop, and what's happening in individual crops. And when we come out here to look, we felt it didn't need a weed spray, so it hasn't had any herbicide. There's a few weeds growing in the bottom, but nothing to worry about. And when it come to fungicide applications, we came out and we looked at the crop. We could see no evidence of fungicide, of a fungal infection, as you would with anything. If you've got athlete's foot, you take an antibiotics. You know, it's the same with a crop. If it's got an infection, you give it something to cure the infection, or we do use protectant fungicides. But because of the year and the weather we've been having, it's not been cold and damp, it's been warm with a little bit of damp and, you know, but more warm and dry, so it's not been good fungus weather. So we've taken the decision to not spray this crop. So apart from a bit of inorganic fertiliser, it's effectively organic. It's effectively organic.
Yeah.
We've put artificial fertiliser on it, but we have used no chemical applications whatsoever.
So this is an area that you've left, Lee, basically with nothing in it. Why would you do that?
Well, we've left, this is what we call a field margin. This one's 4 metres wide. You can have them any width you like. We've chosen 4 metres. We feel that's a good width. There's no need for us to grow a crop right up to the hedgerow. The rules we have to abide by mean we have to come a metre from the hedgerow anyway. We've decided to put the margins in to aid wildlife, aid a bit of diversity in plant life, and it also gives a corridor for the wildlife, and it means we have a neat, clean margin between the edge of the crop and the margin or nature, if you like, so that we don't have yield losses that tail off into the hedgerow or the hedgerow coming out into the crop. And then when we're applying chemicals, we're not applying them anywhere near the hedgerow or the wildflowers or anything that lives in there. So it gives us a buffer.
So, I mean, this is what you're doing in 2020, and I was looking at stuff from the 60s to the 80s. There's a lot of changes in the farming thought process now.
Yes, there has been a lot of changes. I mean, don't get me wrong, the thought process was about then, but the onus was on production and efficiencies, and it was like everything in the 60s, 70s, 80s. You know, technology was marching on. You can be more efficient, then do it this way, which is what everyone wanted to do. But now we've kind of reached a plateau of efficiency, if you see what I mean, with yield potential and the chemicals we've got. So now we're looking at other ways of making us more efficient. This is one way of making us more efficient, because the bit of ground under the hedge is not always the best bit of ground in the world, so we're spending money on it and it's not giving us a return. So if we take that out of the system, it makes us more efficient. So less is more sometimes.
Yes, and it's benefiting wildlife.
Exactly.
Which is what a lot of people are complaining about, or perceive to think that wildlife isn't getting a fair crack.
Exactly, yes. There's a great perception that all we're doing is farming the countryside and we don't care about the wildlife. But we care about the wildlife, we want the wildlife, because the wildlife help us to do our job. So we are third generation of my family on this farm.
Lee, you have brought me to, well, for me it's sort of the piece de resistance, really. We're in this wildflower meadow, and this is so exhilarating to walk amongst all the different types of wildflowers. I see there's birdfoot trefoil and all sorts of other delightful things here.
This is actually a herb and legume rich ley. They call it. This has been put in as part of our stewardship, which we have on the farm. We've got 5 acres here. It was a field we chose, central location on the farm, and it was a field that was getting a little bit fiddly to farm, and also it needed a rest. It was just getting a little bit tired, it needed a rest. So we put this down. It's quite a diverse mix. It's got parsley, coriander, bird's foot trefoil, a couple of different types of clover. There's some chard in here as well, and some grass mix and some native grass species, and that just gives pollen and nectar all year round, basically.
Right.
From early in the season to late in the season. We will cut this once a year. maybe twice depending on growth. We're not allowed to cut it until, I think it's the 1st of August is the date, and that allows everything to flower, all the pollen to be collected, and it to do its job in the ecosystem. A lot of people would say it looks a bit of a mess. I think it looks quite nice.
I think it's lovely.
Yeah,
the detail is when you look at it.
Yeah.
You know, and there's all the colours and the different flowers. But the other thing is there's the insects. I mean, I'm standing in and they're all crawling up my leg.
They're bouncing about all over the place. We've got plenty. I've seen 3 or 4 different types of butterfly out here so far. There's crickets, there's grasshoppers, there's all sorts of things jumping about in here. So it gives not only pollen and nectar, there's food for birds, there's food for bats. There'll be, mice, voles, all sorts in here for the higher chain predators like kestrels. We've got red kites, we've got buzzards. So everyone benefits from it. Also, we've got a few deer on the farm that come in and out. So, you often see a mum out here with her fawn because she can lay it up in the grass out the way. So, it benefits everything and everyone, really.
And I thought this sort of thing had died away, that, looking at the sort of 40 years ago when it was that intensive farming that we spoke about before, this wasn't really a thing, was it?
No, it wasn't. Anyone that would look at it would be, that's a bit of a mess. What are you doing? You can't earn money out of that. Now, from the accountant's point of view, again, this is part of a stewardship package. We do get a payment for doing this here. It by no means covers the entire cost of doing it here, but it helps us doing it. It's an incentive for us to do it. So the incentive that the ground wasn't productive in the first place, but also we get a little bit of money for doing it. I'm happy to do this, and it helps everyone and helps everything.
So another piece, Lee, of stuff for wildlife. This is your winter bird feed.
Yes, this is another 5-acre field. We're tucked right up in the far eastern reaches. Makes it sound huge, of the farm.
It is. It's a lovely farm.
Yeah, we're up against Hesworth Common here, just outside of Fittleworth. And this field again, it was a small field. Getting a bit of a pain, few telegraph poles in it, things like that. So we took the decision to put this in with the legume-rich sward you saw earlier.
Yes.
This is a winter bird food crop. It's a 2-year mix. This went in the spring. There is a mix of there's, now I'm going to get this right, spring barley, there's buckwheat, there's 2 varieties of oil radish, there's a millet, there's quinoa, which is very trendy, so that works. And there's also some sunflowers in here because I had some sunflowers kicking about. And that will give a winter bird food mix for 2 years. Some of the barley and the buckwheat will be this year's food. And then what's not eaten will grow next year. And then the millet and the quinoa will flower next year. There's also some kale in here, and that will come next year and give bird food next year. So it'll give a range of food for a range of species right through the winter months.
It's absolutely amazing. And again, you've got all this mayweed down here, so you've got a nice variety of colour. And the other thing is you've got a footpath that goes through your farm.
Yes.
And one of the things that I was worried about and reading about in my previous video, when I was looking at the monoculture of one of the fields that which is all this barley, was that the footpaths go through the land and it's all the same. But that's not the case now.
No, it's far from the case. If you go on the downs where you were, it will look like that because a lot of the footpaths, they'll go through one farm then the next farm, and downland farming is different to lowland farming where we are. It's very thin soils. It suits spring cropping, like spring barley, so you will get an abundance of that sort of crop. Right. So it will look like it is monoculture because that's what that ground is best suited for. The ground where we are now, it's best suited for a variety of spring and winter cropping, which is what we do here. So we have a bit more variation. We're only custodians. I'm only here to look after this. It's not mine. It belongs to everyone. I want people to enjoy it, but I've still got to make a living. So as long as that balance can be kept, I'm approachable. If people want to come and see me, people want to ask me questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm not the archetypal miserable old farmer that's get off my land, go away. I can be sometimes, but I'm not like that. I'd rather educate people. If you've got a question, hopefully I can answer it, or I can point you in the right direction so that you can get an answer and you can, have more knowledge of where your food comes from and what's happening in the countryside.
Lee, thank you so much for taking me around the farm.
That's all right.
It's been really good. Do leave a comment if you're surprised by this or encouraged by this or want to hear it. If you've got any questions, also leave them in the comment. It's absolutely fantastic. Give us a thumbs up and a like and all the usual nonsense. And hopefully I'll be out again and looking at some more of this wonderful countryside that we so much enjoy. Till next time, thanks for watching. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.